Hello, my name's Sarah Law. I'm a chartered occupational psychologist and I'm going to talk to you about polarities. All of us have grown up and been educated in a world where we do a lot of problem solving. We have to find the right answer when we're at school to our maths problems, to our tricky geometry problems. We have to understand the root cause of things. We're looking for answers to problems, to challenges. However, all of us, as we get into the more complex world of work, encounter things which don't seem to have a single right answer, which are complex and chronic and ongoing. They feel unsolvable because if you go one way or the other, you're going to lose out. Polarities is a really helpful concept and way of thinking that genuinely enables you to work with two seemingly opposing ideas. What happens when you need to do both? How can we have an and mentality, not an or mentality? It doesn't all have to be about mental health. It doesn't all have to be about physical health. It's far more effective if we can think about balancing both of those when the ultimate goal is overall health and well-being. If we just focus on one or just focus on the other, we're not going to achieve what we really want to do. So polarities, and what we're going to talk about today, is a way of recognizing that and then starting to map it out so that we can do something with it, so we can manage the tension. Let's have a look at some slides. So this idea of interdependent pairs, this idea of it's not a single solution, is a really interesting way to consider some of the complex challenges. And one of the lovely examples we always draw upon at the beginning is the idea of breathing in and breathing out. Both of these are really important if we want to live. We can't just do one or the other. And it's this idea that you need both to really achieve that ultimate purpose. So let's think about things, in a bit more complicated situation. This, the classic one, the country, the world has been dealing with this over the last year or so. How do we get that balance when we need to protect people's health? We have to put those COVID protections in place. And we need a healthy economy if we're going to survive and thrive as a country. We've seen what happens when the government is trying to do one or the other. We've seen there will be pressure to do one and not the other. And yet we need to get a balance, and we need to constantly manage and constantly check and see what's happening if we're going to get that right. Here's another example of a polarity. I did some work last year with a group of charity leaders, fantastic people, really, really focused on looking out for other people, caring for others, very, very strong values in that arena. And yet, a lot of them were reaching burnout. A lot of them were so focused on others, whether it was their own groups of volunteers or the people they were supporting, that they, as leaders, were starting to burn out. And working with them to explore the positives of getting this balance, of recognizing the tension and being able to say, we do need to invest in some self-care in order to also do our work in caring for others. It was a really powerful session. Maybe think about how that applies to you. Do you get that balance right in your life? Do you get the balance right spending time with family, spending time with yourself? Do you get the balance right in terms of exercise and rest? This is a classic one. I also work with some athletes, and you see people who are training very hard for something like a marathon. They're so focused on their activity that they can find it very hard to take the rest they need, to give themselves that time for their body to recover, so that then they can do their activity even better next time. And it's quite tough because all of us are likely to have a preference for one or the other. Let's think about work. Whatever your work situation, you will have areas which you have to balance. Working with a group of NHS leaders down in the southwest, they had some real tensions, of course. How do we do all of this new COVID work and yet we have our regular work to do? We had the person who was the head of maternity services, and as she said, people will keep having babies and we have to make sure it's COVID safe for them to do so. So trying to juggle, trying to make sure that that works requires attention, requires management, and it requires a different mindset, because we're saying and, not or. It's not one or the other. The other examples on this slide, where do you have that place of care? Is it most appropriate in a hospital? Is it in a community? Chances are, a town, a county, an area of the country is going to need both for a healthy population. I mentioned earlier, getting that balance right between physical and mental health. Really important. There's a lot more attention being paid to mental health now, which is terrific. And let's make sure we get that balance. Discussions between clinicians wanting to do the right things clinically and patients and service users saying, hang on, no decision about us without us, has generated some very interesting debates over the last few years. Those of you who manage a team, getting that balance right, challenging your team enough, pushing them enough, and supporting them so they feel appreciated and valued and more able to be challenged in order to. Because remember, all the time we have these two factors, the two interdependent poles, they are there for a purpose, they're there for a reason. So that last point about challenge and support is very much about how do we get a team really performing well, really being effective. And actually, the flip side of that is if we don't get that balance right, our team are going to burn out or coast or just not live up to their full potential, which is not what we want. So let's look at a polarity map then. How do we take this idea of this duality and do something with it? So there is a very straightforward little visual that we use. There's the handout and support documents, the leadership bites that you can get to support this. And we start by thinking, what do we think our pair is? Remember, both sides will be positive. What are they both contributing towards? What is our greater purpose? And actually, if we get them wrong, what is our deeper fear? So if we go back to our protecting our population, restarting the economy, if both of those work well, we have a country that thrives and survives. If those go wrong, people die, people suffer. So it's very clear that we have to, it's worth paying attention to this. So we have our lovely purple and pink and blue diagram. And the idea with this is it's a very simple mapping process. We name each of our poles. So self-care, caring for others, activity and rest, COVID work, regular work. And we start to think about what would the positives be if we really focused on that side of things. If we really worked maybe with our team, our colleagues to say, let's identify all of those positives that are going to come about as a result of focusing on this pole. We then change hats. We take off our maybe rose-tinted glasses and say, if we over-focus on that side, if we purely do all of the COVID work, for example, and forget the rest of it, what might happen? And just allow yourself to catastrophize, to think of the worst case scenarios. Because remember, the point of doing this analysis is to get it all out there. You then change sides and say, okay, let's look at the other side. Let's look at the other pole. What would the positive results be if we genuinely focused on that and everything went well? Then you put your negative glasses back on. What happens if we over-focus? So you now have the start of your polarity map. You've identified your two poles, interdependent pairs, seemingly in opposition, but both of them contributing to the achievement of greater purpose. Both of them, you recognize that if you get it wrong, things could go badly wrong. You've mapped out the positive results of focusing on each. You've mapped out the negative results if you over-focus. Then you may have noticed there's kind of an infinity loop going all the way around this polarity map. And if you look at the direction of the circle, what happens? Basically, over-focus on one pole, you are likely to start to go into the negative zone. Once you go into that negative zone, there is a strong draw to move over to the other side. So you may see this, for example, in planning for change. I see it a lot in different organizations, where if on one side you have emergent change, let's just see what happens, let's go with the flow. And on the other hand, you have planned change, very specific, very tightly laid out change. Too much of one, you see the organization shifting. Let's move to the other type. Of course, what happens? Remember that flow. Chances are, once you've spent too much time on that side, you will go down to the other side. And so the flow carries on. So what we need to do to be able to manage this flow is to actually think about, right, let's get some detail on here. We've talked about results, focusing or over-focusing. What are we going to do about it? So this final part of the jigsaw puzzle, this final part of the map, is where we put some more specifics down. It's where we identify, and I'd always recommend do this with your team or your colleagues if you can, how can we stay in that positive side? Who needs to be involved? What are the measures that we're looking for here? What needs to be done to keep us in that positive space? When does it need to be done by? A lot of that will be in your plans already. This is not starting from scratch, but let's identify those and let's be clear about them. Do that on both sides. The next point, and to me this is a really powerful bit, what are the warning signs? What is going to start to happen when that shift goes, when you've started to over-focus? How are you going to notice? What are you going to monitor to make sure that you don't stay down in that negative side? And remember, there will always be a little bit of tension. There'll always be times when maybe you have to go more on one side than the other. But understanding that this is a polarity and working with both sides deliberately with purpose and intent will allow you to manage it more effectively. So this is the end of the Polarities video. My name's been Sarah Law. Really good to speak with you, and I do hope that you get a chance to apply this. I think it's a terrific tool. I've seen it used in loads of different ways, and good luck.